Thank you for joining us on Music Talk at McNally Robinson. We're on the land of Treaty 6, the homeland of the Métis. My name is Zhuang, the acting principal flute of the Saskatoon Symphony Orchestra, and I have the honor to fill in for our dear CEO, Mark Turner, tonight. Tonight we have a very special guest, William Rowson. We're very happy to have you. Thank you for coming back. Yeah.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's really great to see you here, and let's jump right into our interviews. You are a composer, a violinist, and a conductor. Well, mostly you're here to join us for our very special program this Saturday.
Yes, so I'm here. I'm a conductor this
Yes.
week, and I'm here for the Saskatchewan Celebration concert at the SSO on Saturday, and it's my favorite kind of program to do. We have two magnificent soloists joining us, Veronique and Godwin, and they're going to play. Veronique is going to play the Sibelius Violin Concerto in D minor, and then on the second half of the concert is the daunting Prokofiev Third Piano Concerto.
Yep.
And the concert opens with Andrew Kessler's beautiful piece, A Suite for the Prairies, which is a lovely, filmically contemporary, I'd say, depiction of what feels like a season on the prairies.
Yes, absolutely. Andrew Kessler is also Saskatoon born, and he's also a Grammy-nominated artist and is currently in America. So we're very excited to give this work a little debut at the end of this weekend. So, William, should we call you Bill?
Yeah, we'll go with Bill.
Yeah, we'll go with Bill tonight. So, you grew up playing the violin and did composition and violin at Curtis.
Yes.
And you went on to Western University in Ontario doing conducting, and then graduated with the DMA at University of Toronto. What a versatile musician, am I right? And afterward, you stay active in both composing and conducting. Your compositions were performed by a numerous ensemble across North America and Europe, and your conducting career took off and did some assistant conducting at VSO, the Vancouver Symphony, and did a year of associate there. And now you're the music director of Stratford Symphony.
That's right. And 1 month ago, I got a new job also with Sudbury Symphony Orchestra. I'm now their artistic and executive director.
What such an accomplishment. Now, I'm going to ask on behalf of everybody that already has questions. Bill, how did you chose the violin and then go into composition and then end up conducting? I mean, these are all a musical route, but they're not very similar one or another.
Well, I began violin here in Saskatoon.
Yes.
When we were very young, there was I'm going to date myself here a little bit, but it was the 1980s. And there was a new Suzuki program run by members of the Saskatoon Symphony, for the most part, and a few of them still are there. So we had a great reunion last night at rehearsal. And so I began taking violin lessons. My parents had decided that my brother and sister and I would all learn an instrument.
Right.
So we've a violinist and a violist and a cellist, and my dad plays the piano. Admirably for a non-professional, and so we played chamber music all over the place, and I just started writing music with no idea of being a professional composer. I just had that proclivity to want to make things, and I had a kind of group at my house we could try things out on, and then I started, still here in Saskatoon, identifying as someone who wants to do music professionally towards the end of grade school, probably. But by that time, I played in the Saskatoon Youth Orchestra, and I had a great community of musician friends here that I still have from those days. I think youth orchestra friends are the best kind of friends. They're really, they're lifelong, and You run into them all over the place. And
you go through the ups and downs, the teenage years, am I right?
Sure. And so we did all of that. And at the end of the grade 9, my father's company transferred him, and we had to move. So we moved to Wyoming, and my family stayed down there for a few years, and then they moved back to Saskatoon after his job there was finished. And at that time, I was university aged, so I got into this school called the Interlochen Performing Arts Academy. It's in Michigan, so I did my last 2 years of high school there, playing violin in the orchestra, and I took lessons with the great Hal Grossman, and it was there that I found they had their theory faculty at the academy taught composition also, and so I met them. Like I introduced myself and said, "Hey, I like to write music," and we got on really, really well, and so I began putting together quite a big composition portfolio, and you go through that time when you apply for conservatories or universities and all that sort of. You send your stuff everywhere, you fly everywhere to do auditions, and then you see what happens. And I got into the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia. So then I moved to Philadelphia and was there for 4 years, and then kind of bummed around New York City for a little while, and then came back to Canada, and then so I was encouraged by Bob Fitzpatrick, who's the dean of the Curtis Institute of Music, to look into pursuing conducting, instrumental conducting primarily. And so I kind of shopped around for that for a little bit, and I met Jerome Summers at Western University, as they call it now. Then it was called the University of Western Ontario, and I got a big fellowship package, which really helped enable that to happen. And I still conduct around there. I'm the music director of the Stratford Symphony, as you said earlier, and that's just half an hour outside of London. And then I just. This is how musicians' journeys go. I'm a Canadian guy, and you kind of flock towards Montreal or Toronto, and so you can get gigs. So I played violin in the Conservatory Orchestra and some other orchestras, and then I managed to get a nice a doctoral stipend to study at U of T. So. Then I took way too long to do that. Like not the non-dissertation part, but the all-but dissertation part was what took forever. And but I was playing and conducting, and then there was a group on the campus of U of T called the Hart House Orchestra, and I got a job conducting that. So what Hart House is it's the smartest orchestra in the world. It's a bunch of doctors and engineers and people who studied music very seriously when they were young and want to play. And so there's 85 of them. It's huge. And so you can do big repertoire. And I did about 18 concerts with them, I think. And then you graduate, and then you have to do something. So I got a job with the Toronto Symphony. Yeah, no, not as a player, though. I was on their staff there temporarily. Yeah. So my specialty was doing bowings for the strings. So I did that for a little while, and then I got a job at the Hamilton Philharmonic conducting a contemporary music festival they had, because a lot of times it's very tricky scores, and very often music directors are at a stage in their career where they're flying around to really do what they know well. And so for the contemporary music festivals their orchestras do, they would hire local conductors. So I would be that guy for a lot of groups. Right. And that was very hard work, because the scores are just, I think it's going to take me as long to learn this as it did for you to write it. Man, this is really hard. Andrew's piece is not like that at all. But, it's quite a pleasure to learn. It's very beautiful. And then I got a job. I got a call from the Stratford Symphony saying, listen, you're a string player. We have an all-string program, and we have a conductor cancellation, which is the best news you get as a young conductor. It's just what you sometimes think, just for fun, like, how can I take this guy out here? So why don't I go for coffee with him? And So I got that call, and then it went really well, and we got along really well, and they asked if I would be their interim artistic advisor, some sort of title like that, and then eventually they just made me the music director. And then I'm really talking about myself a lot here. And then I won a job with the Vancouver Symphony. So that was an audition, and it was one of those awful auditions that take 3 days, and there's hearing tests and written tests and 3 rounds of conducting and interviews, and if you don't win those, you just go home. Nothing for second place. So I won one, and then they offered me a 3-year contract to be their assistant conductor, which is like being the assistant coach, but kind of like NHL level group. So that was all right. And then they renewed me for another year, and they made me their associate conductor, which just meant I did all of that plus a little bit more. And then recently I won the job in Sudbury, where I get to be head coach.
Yeah.
So.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
How is life? How is balancing everything all together?
Yeah, it's so I'm a very blessed man. I married a wonderful person whose family, she has musician siblings and studied music herself, and works for the Vancouver Symphony, and is also from Saskatoon, and we met actually when we were children in the youth orchestra here, but. So she understands. She works with conductors all the time. She knows how it works. So some parts of the season are challenging. This year's challenging for me. I have this new job in Sudbury. I suddenly have 3 programs to take on, and so I'll be here this week. Then I'm in Berlin next week. Then I'm in Stratford the next week, and then I'm in Sudbury the next week, and then back to Vancouver to see my kids. That's the worst stretch. Usually I really try to plan things so I'm not out of town for more than 2 weeks at a time. Yeah. And I should say we've really rigged it to help my sister's family and my family. We all live in the same house. So, and she's got children our age, and we've had to make our lives work for what we want to do. It's not maybe normal for most people, but we all get along really well, and there's always somebody at home to look after the kids. And so when I'm at home, I don't. There's just nothing maestro about that at all. I do all the cooking, school drop-offs. I go to all the teacher meetings, and I'm just a chauffeur. Or if we go hiking, I'm just like a mule. I just carry the 6-year-old on my back, and I even meal prep and you name it. Just because I know I'm going to be going out of town for the following week.
Yeah, for sure. Now, so growing up in Saskatoon, and still, because you came back a couple years ago during the Christmas concert, and then we did some of your work in the candlelight concert as well. And then now to this Saturday's program, what are your visions when you put these together? What is the vision of the program, and why did we pick these pieces with the performers?
It's so we took the angle that I think those of us working professionally on the inside appreciate the most, as we decided that it was that this is a Saskatchewan celebration, and we're going to try to engineer everything to really showcase our 2 soloists, and so we let them come forward with the repertoire that they want to do. So Godwin Friesen just won the OSM competition with Prokofiev 3, so it's really in his repertoire. It's a big competition winning piece. You have to be very brave as an orchestra to program it. It's challenging to play. It's very challenging to conduct, I will say. And it just because it's...
We'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll get to it. And we wanted to finish, we wanted to feature music made here. So A Suite for the Prairies was written in Saskatchewan during COVID, and so normally when you put together a program, every piece will have something to do with the water, or every piece will have something to do with nature, and in this case, it's completely performer centric that way. So I would hold to it that the narrative of the show is a showcase for the really, really top talent coming in this industry from this city. So, and it's plenty. It's every penny's worth. There's 2 blockbuster concertos on the same program. That's rare.
Mm-hmm.
That's rare, and that's usually just sort of too expensive to entertain.
Yeah.
So, you're in for a treat this weekend.
And we're really excited because the first piece, like Bill just said, Andrew Kessler composed it towards the end of 2021, where apparently he's in a hut in his home here in Saskatchewan, and he actually published a MIDI file because there was, obviously nobody could perform anything large scale at that time. He put this MIDI file on YouTube and said he always wanted to let his hometown orchestra doing it. So we're very glad that we're doing it this weekend and having the uprising artists from the Saskatoon Youth Orchestra that will be joining us. So they will be playing the piece and along with a few selected SSO members who are their usual mentors. And they're very excited and they've been working on it very hard, and they're very much looking forward to working with you. Yeah.
Oh, I've sat in their chair before.
Yeah.
We call them sort of side by side concerts.
Yes.
And in this case though, this year the SYO rather, the Saskatoon Youth Orchestra, is going to, apart from a few people filling in some extra parts, is going to kind of hold the stage on their own. And so I'm looking forward to that a lot. It'll be very exciting. And working with young people is fun. They're super keen.
Yes.
And it's the first time, and so you have to approach that a little bit differently. But it's going to be terrific. And I think that Andrew's given them a great piece of music. It lays well in the hands. It's very idiomatically written. I said, excuse me, the other day that it's sort of artfully, we say filmic.
Yes.
Sometimes when you're talking about contemporary music, you have to sort of just try to say what kind of contemporary music we're talking about, because some of it sounds like bleeps and gurgles, and some of it sounds like these minimalist drones that sort of go on for a long time. This one sounds like if there were an epic movie made about Saskatchewan, it would just be the soundtrack. It's big sweeping vistas, and there's a snowstorm, and it's got it all, and the ending is spectacular. So
yeah, I was gonna say one of my very favorite moments is towards the end, before the very end climax, we have a little bit of like tiny little solo sections, and then the clarinet solo would come in taking a little bit of stompy step, and then the flutes will respond in a very teasing kind of gesture, responding to it, and before the final ending.
Yeah, and this beautiful moment also toward the end where Andrew had envisioned a children's chorus singing, so very pure tone. It's quite striking.
Yeah,
and then the end is just majestic. So it's.
And for those that are in for a treat this Saturday, you can at the evening you'll really get to hear this picture and image how Andrew Kessler is portraying so clearly. It's almost like you can see what he's painting. Like the beginning, there's the river, and then the sunshine. It comes out very, very much clearly, and I'm very excited to hear it. Yeah.
It's like Daphnis and Chloe. It's got a beautiful. We should say for people that Andrew's from here. He lives in Los Angeles now.
Yes.
And he works in. I think he makes his living arranging things for film and television and whatnot. He's Grammy nominated and
very versatile.
Yeah.
Also like producer as well. And
recording engineer. Very, very tech savvy. So I think it's a real coup for the Saskatoon Symphony to offer him a concert platform that kind of puts all of that together, where he can have a little moment to show people what he can do.
Very much.
Yeah.
Well, next let's talk about the Sibelius Violin Concerto, which is actually known as one of the most intensive and difficult concerto until nowadays, and it was apparently only reserved for the most virtuosic violinist players. Like, if you're not that good, don't hang out with us. Yeah. Well, and then there's this fantastic backstory, and I believe Bill can tell you about it, how the compositions came together, and yeah.
You mean about the Sibelius violin concerto? There was a few versions of it.
Yes.
At first. Yeah. And so I think it was 1901 and 1905. The first one came out, and it was just sort of unplayably long, and then he revised it to make it barely playable. and that's the version that everybody knows today.
Yeah.
I know it very well. I studied it in my youth as a violinist and got through the first movement anyway. And it's full of notorious passages. There's a passage in the third movement where there's these scalar passages in thirds played in double stops. I got a funny story about that, actually. So when I was at Curtis, there was a Polish violinist. Won't say his name, but he was kind of a character. And people at that school practiced a bit too much, and so everybody would hear him in his room, and he'd play that passage in the thirds, and he wanted to not fear it, because you can't go on stage if you have fear. You have to. So then he'd start talking to the music, and he'd say, "You, I know you." And he'd say things like, then he'd play it again. Did you like it? Go on and on. And he didn't know that there was 4 or 5 of us outside the door just listening. And he's like, he's doing it again. And he's a fantastic violinist. And
I mean, if that works, I would take your own.
If it works for you, we need somebody that can play it. If that can, it's very daunting. So what the Sibelius Violin Concerto is, although it was written in the early 20th century, it's a late Romantic work. Jean Sibelius was Finnish, and so it is distinctly not a German or Russian concerto. Sibelius's concerto, like Mendelssohn's, it begins with the soloist right away. So very often we'll have an orchestral introduction, and then everything gets set up, and then the soloist comes in. Sibelius begins not tonally ambiguous, but just with a shimmering D minor in the strings with their mutes on. Like, he already from the get-go wants a color that's not a typical 19th century orchestral sound. And when the soloist first comes in the third measure, she comes in on the wrong note. She comes in on a non-harm. It's in D minor. She comes in on a G, which already feels like it's got to go somewhere. And one of the unique things about the Sibelius concerto is how often when you write concertos, there's a discourse between the soloist and the orchestra, and they kind of have a role, or there's a dialogue happening there. It's compelling that way. It's periodic, and it's and so Sibelius sets his concerto up from the get-go to just not have that. So he is very brilliantly sets the tonality of the violin to always be just pushing against the orchestra a little bit, and it just makes this icy. I just imagine just icy finish, rocks and trees and frozen lakes, and then the second theme group is this beautifully expressive and it would be lovely, except he does it in octaves and then later in tenths, and which are hard. Maybe if some of you play guitar, sometimes you have to really wrench your hand around to get all the notes. It's sort of like that. But the soloist would be playing in a 3 pattern, and the orchestra's in a 2 pattern, and the conductor gets to sort of stand between all of that and have it hold together. And the second movement is this beautiful romance. It begins with the clarinets, and it's gorgeous, with a big dramatic outburst in the middle, and then the finale is the orchestra just kind of chugs along. Sibelius does this in all of his music, these ostinato, just dum da da 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 dum is an ostinato word. Da 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 da. Film music uses it all the time. It just repeats over and over. It's like a motor. So it has this rhythmic motor in the orchestra, and then the violin is just fireworks, with these passages and thirds that terrify musicians, and it's about 40 minutes long, and it just gets harder and harder. And so by the time you get to the last page, it's tense, sliding down, and it kind of worked. Sibelius was a violinist, so he made it work. But I think both the Sibelius Concerto and Tchaikovsky's Concerto were both pushed the envelope so much when they first came out that people said, this is not playable. This is... And then there's always some person who's like, people are amazing. I once had a conversation with David Diamond, composer, but he also played French horn, I think it was. And one of his kind of early claim to fame is he was a gigging New York musician, and he played in the original orchestra pit for West Side Story in the 1950s, which for musicals, Rodgers and Hammerstein back then was kind of the norm, right? And then West Side Story comes along with all these mixed meters and just crazy chords, and he's like, we were flubbing all over it. It was the hardest thing. And nowadays, like, high school orchestras can play that stuff. Yeah. You know, we rise to the occasion. People do. And that's what happened with these concertos. And that's the Sibelius Concerto is legendary in that regard for violinists.
Yeah, for sure. And we're very excited to have Veronique Matthew, which is a good friend of mine, and she's the David Kaplan Chair of Strings at the University of Saskatchewan. So such a violin, she does a lot of violin solos around the world and plays, very fantastically. For those that were here for the first concert of the year, so 2023 in September, we had the Museum of the Moon program. She played the Four Season Recomposed piece. So we're very excited to have her. And I personally am very looking forward to hearing her cadenza so there's this cadenza that is very long at the, starts at the development section of the first movement and then goes in before the recap.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Which is not where they normally are.
No.
Yeah, again, the whole concerto is just slightly different. Don't worry about different. It's marvelous. Like, there's nothing. Sibelius Concerto is, its poetry is very organic. Each sound leads to the next sound, and it's the narrative unfolding of it as a concerto is sublime. It's very generous to the orchestra also. It's much more symphonically composed.
Yes.
Which is hard for the conductor also, because the clarinet does this and the violin does, it's all got to line up. And where some concertos, the orchestra goes yum chicka dum cha dum cha and then diminuendo, and then the soloist plays on top.
Oh yeah.
And great musicians make that fabulous, and I do that all the time. Sibelius is much more like a symphony with just this crazy violin part. And so you'll experience it just this very, very evocative, organic beginning. And it beautifully just begins to bring in the virtuosity, theme after theme, monumentally big cadenza. It's big like the Rachmaninoff Third Piano Concerto original cadenza. And then the cadenza just turns into these fast notes and the orchestra comes back in. And the end, like a lot of concertos, the first movement ends and you're going to think it's over because what are you going to do after that? Then there's this just searingly beautiful second movement, and then the ending is the finale is a proper finale.
Yeah. And to even add that to the program, we have pianist Godwin Friesen, who is going to be joining us after winning on the Prokofiev Piano Concerto No. 3, which I personally think is a very contrasting character of Sibelius.
It is very different concerto. So the Prokofiev Third Concerto, he says, is in C major, and it is in places. It ends in C major, but there's a big D at the top. Big C major is 9th and 7th included in it, and the end of the second movement and is ambiguously between E minor and C major. The Prokofiev, so it was written 1921. Prokofiev's Russian, and they had been through a whole lot of things in Russia by about that time, and they were. The poetry of Prokofiev's concerto is one of the modern world. It's one of jump cuts, like an early film, whereas the Sibelius is like a single tree growing out of the rocks in northern Finland. The Prokofiev's is like busy St. Petersburg with the new trams and streetcars and all the new industry and the 1920s were the decade of the isms. There was what do they call it? Primitivism and Dadaism and all the neoclassicism, and it was a great century of searching. Is jazz okay to use? Yeah, okay, and and Prokofiev's concerto is this beautiful Russian sort of response to that. And so, by jump cutting, I mean that he just slams one theme into the next one. And I said, I love Prokofiev, so I don't want these things to come off as sounding negative.
Yeah, no.
So it begins with this absolutely beautiful lyric Russian tune, simple, almost no expression. And the strings, violins come in and they just sort of float on mostly a C major chord. And then all of a sudden there's just this scurrying, rapid, like... too many notes, it's so fast. And then the third theme group in the first movement is a march, essentially with castanets. And so here's some things I would say about Prokofiev that are very important in this concerto. Prokofiev, like his predecessors, Tchaikovsky and Glazunov, was a great ballet composer, great man of the theater. And the expression of the concerto lives in characterization a little bit of the music, so not like Rachmaninoff. When Rachmaninoff is feeling sad, you hear it. Prokofiev's a little bit more detached. It's a little bit more a character in the story. Much like Stravinsky. Is it Stravinsky crying, or is it his puppet Petrushka that he's making crying music for? Don't shy away from that, because the artistry is tremendous. Prokofiev was also a sketchbook composer. He always was writing something, and he'd put this together with this and this together with that. And the concerto was the second movement was written in 1913. 1917, earlier. Second movement is a theme in variations. It begins with what is essentially a gavotte. He doesn't call it a gavotte, but it's a Prokofiev ballet gavotte. It's followed by 5 variations and then a beautiful coda, ending ambiguously. And then the last movement is like the Sibelius. You look at it and you're like, which one of these notes is he going to drop? Like it's a daunting piece. So I'll just say that most people know the Rachmaninoff concertos, the second and the third. They're very difficult, long narrative pieces to play. A lot of pianists will say, yeah, but then you get to Prokofiev's second concerto and then the third concerto, and that's when you're like, wow.
This is one of his most signature, at least of piano concertos, and I personally love how you can just tell he's like the odd kid in school and is confident with being, knocking off that chair and then taking things down. I think it's very, and it's very, it's not usual at the time, right?
No, it was, and he was an enfant terrible. Like he really, he wanted to have his identity be that way. And so in fact, this concerto was written in rural France. Prokofiev left Russia following the Ballet Russe and following Rachmaninoff. They had this thing that happened there, and a lot of people had to leave. And he wrote it for himself as a vehicle, as a performer.
Yep.
He was a marvelous pianist, like Rachmaninoff. And it was premiered by the Chicago Symphony. So, you used to live in Chicago, so
Yeah.
that very hall is where it was premiered. And so for when you're playing a musician's piece, it's like violinists playing Paganini. He was a violinist. He wrote this music for himself as a vehicle to look spectacular.
It's so amazing.
Yeah.
And you actually can find him playing the recording of him playing his own concerto with the London Symphony, and I think this is the recording of 1932. You can find out on YouTube, and it's really fascinating to see how he expressed his own composition in his own way and take inspiration from that. It's really important to learn.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a good reference for tempo modulations and how do we do,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of that, we were talking about how, first of all, you're working with this, this Saturday we're going to have not only the Saskatoon Symphony, but you'll be working with the Saskatoon Youth Orchestra musicians. And on top, we have 2 incredible concertos. So that will require great strength of yours. What are some of your strategies that you have going into this?
Well, I have done the Sibelius before, which really helps. So one thing, concertos are hard for conductors because there's just a lot you can mess up, and so learn your music early. Strategy number 1, and I try to mark things very carefully, know how you're going to rehearse it, have your questions very carefully worked out for your soloist. I tend to think of my role in this is that you're going to be my soloist, and we're going to look after you. I know what it's like to have to try to play a concerto like that on stage. You're just nervous enough. You just want to know that what's happening behind you is fine.
Yep.
Breathe with the soloist, watch the soloist. Work with them to help you communicate to the orchestra what needs to happen, you got to get a good night's sleep. You have to go into it very, very relaxed, and you have to know with these high wire concertos like this, you got to be relaxed on that high wire a little bit. You can't.
You have to pull yourself back towards it.
You have to, yes. Also, it's why conductors love doing the big symphonies, because we can really just, look at me. And you need to just stay very objective with pieces like the Prokofiev, for example, and a few places in the first movement of the Sibelius, where if you're just being a time beater, that's the best thing you can be right then. It's whatever they need when it's hard like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have one final questions before we move on to the audience question. For those that are watching today in person, or some of us that are joining in online, there will be some younger musicians out here from the community that are, that are upbringing, and they set you as an inspiration for a way to explore in more careers in music. Maybe they want to be a performer, maybe they want to be a composer or a conductor. What is one advice that you would give to them?
I've never been asked that.
It's tough, very tough question. One advice.
Assuming they really love music, like you got to really love music. Because all of that stuff to bring a $5,000 violin and a $500 car and spend $50 of gas to make $5 at the gig is, it's true for a while. I would say that study with the best people you can. Help people to help you. And learn to love the process of it, and be in that place. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Careers can happen in multiple stages all at once, long burn. One thing somebody told me once that I often remember is that when NASA launches those satellites into space, and the space shuttles, they have this big orange tank on the bottom. That big tank is full of fuel or oxygen or whatever it is in the tank, but it takes 80% of the fuel in the tank to get the bottom of the rocket to the top of the tower. And by that time, there's enough momentum that 20% left of the gas will take you into the atmosphere. And so many people kind of they're looking at their tank reserves and they're like, I'm this age now. I have too many multiple incomes and I don't have one income. I'm not employed in the traditional sense. And my tank's half gone. And you need to remember that if you can clear the tower, there'll be enough momentum to keep going. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions from the audience and the seats here? Okay, let's read some online question and we will wrap up. Let's see.
So you had asked me one piece of advice, and I think I just gave you.
Well, these are very, very valuable. So we have one question. As a violinist, do you feel like you conduct violin concerto differently than concertos featuring other instruments?
Well, that's a really good question, and I'd like to say no. I'm objective about all of it. With violin concertos and some piano concertos, I feel very keenly aware of what's happening there. Mm-hmm. And so you want to distance yourself from the fear you would have playing something as a violinist, like that passage in thirds we talked about, the whole bit of opening of everybody can play the first page great. It's by the time you get to page 3. So if you've done it yourself, I think you can be very sensitive to the performer because you can internalize their rhythm of this, and I'm staying calm here, and where that could help is maybe it's not helpful to start getting all energetic and shaking at the violins to make more volume, and maybe it just needs to stay in control. And so, yes, I've conducted many concertos that I would never play myself. Like I'm doing some bass concertos next year, and I take my violin out. I learn it all that way, but so I will say, ideally, no, I don't. I approach it properly, the way I was trained to learn a concerto and to perform it. But there's a certain sympathies with the violinists that
for sure
that I tune into.
Yeah, you have to take it into account a little bit. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for coming here tonight. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you to McNally Robinson. Thank you to the stage crew. And finally, thank you for Bill or William Rowson for having us tonight. So I hope you all have a wonderful evening, and we hope to see you this Saturday at TCU.
Thank you.